What if the women you think you understand are actually playing roles written deep inside your unconscious? Carl Jung warned of a dark truth about femininity, a truth most men ignore until it destroys them. Tonight, we're not talking about all women, but about an ancient psychological force hidden within some of them, a shadow Jung believed could seduce, manipulate, and even consume the soul of a man. This is the truth men must face, or risk becoming prisoners of their own blind desire. Carl Jung revealed that within every man lies a hidden image of woman, a living presence in his unconscious that shapes how he perceives the feminine. He named this mysterious figure the Anima. She is not a real woman, but a psychic imprint that begins to form from a man's earliest contact with the feminine, the tenderness of his mother, the authority of a teacher, the affection or absence of a sister. These impressions sink beneath the surface of consciousness and gather into a figure that waits silently in the depths of the psyche. When the man grows older, he does not encounter women as they truly are, he encounters them through the lens of this internal image. This is why a simple encounter can feel overwhelming. A glance, a smile, a certain tone of voice can awaken in him a sense of recognition, almost as if he has discovered something sacred. But he is not meeting the woman herself. He is meeting his own unconscious projection brought to life by her presence. To him, she feels destined, almost divine. He believes he has found the answer to something missing in himself, but what he has really found is the external trigger for his inner anima. Throughout history, this projection has played out on the grand stage of myth and legend. Men have told stories of women who seem to hold impossible sway over their hearts and minds. Helen of Troy is remembered not just as a queen, but as the spark that ignited a war of nations. Was it truly her beauty that brought kings and warriors to ruin? Or was it that each man gazed upon her and saw the radiant reflection of his own anima, his own unspoken longing? Cleopatra's magnetic charm over Julius Caesar and Mark Antony is remembered as nearly supernatural. Yet Jung would suggest that her true power lay not only in her character but in the projections cast upon her by men who saw in her more than a queen, they saw a goddess of their unconscious fantasies. In the modern world, the phenomenon continues in subtler forms. A man scrolling through social media might stumble upon a woman whose photographs seem to carry an otherworldly allure. He begins to imagine her as his perfect counterpart, the one who could heal his loneliness or bring him purpose. Yet he knows nothing of her reality. He is in love with a projection born of his own psychic depths. A chance encounter in real life, a coworker, a stranger in a cafe, can have the same effect. Suddenly, she feels familiar, almost faded. The man cannot explain why, but Jung could. He is not meeting her, he is meeting the ancient figure of his anima awakened by her presence. The danger lies in how convincing this illusion can be. Because the anima feels so alive, the man believes the woman herself embodies everything he sees. He crowns her with the glory of his own unconscious desires. He places her on a pedestal and believes she can never fall. But reality cannot sustain the weight of archetype. Inevitably, the woman reveals her humanity, her flaws, her moods, her contradictions. To the man, this feels like betrayal, though the betrayal was his own self-deception. He was never in love with her as she was, he was in love with the radiant mask of his anima. This cycle explains why some relationships begin with intoxicating intensity and collapse into bitterness. The man insists she has changed, but what changed was his projection. The golden glow of the anima faded, and with it, his illusion. The woman remains who she always was, but he no longer sees her through the same psychic filter. This collapse often leaves him disillusioned, resentful, even broken. He may feel tricked by her, when in truth he was tricked by his own unconscious. Jung stressed that projection of the anima is not a weakness limited to a few, it is universal. Every man carries her, and every man projects her at some point in his life. To deny her existence is to walk blind into her influence. To recognize her is to take the first step toward freedom. When a man begins to see how his unconscious paints women with the brush of archetype, he can step back and question whether he is seeing the person or the projection. The seduction of the anima is so powerful because it promises completion. She whispers to him that he will finally be whole if he surrenders to her. In a sense, she represents the missing half of his psyche, the doorway to his emotional depths, his intuition, his creativity. This makes her irresistible. But when he confuses the symbol with a living woman, he sets himself on a path toward disappointment. No human being can embody the eternal image of the unconscious. She can inspire, she can awaken, but she cannot fulfill the archetypal promise his psyche longs for. Even in ordinary life, this pattern repeats endlessly. A man falls for someone he barely knows, invests her with a sense of magic, and cannot understand why the spell breaks later. Another man idealizes his partner, worships her as flawless, only to grow cold and bitter when she fails to live up to the impossible image he created. These are not isolated tragedies, they are the natural consequence of living under the spell of the anima without awareness. This is the unsettling truth Jung uncovered. When men believe they are enchanted by certain women, they are in fact enchanted by their own unconscious. The woman is real, but the force that blinds him to her humanity is not hers, it is his. The anima wears her face, but the power is born from within his psyche. Until he learns to recognize the projection, he will remain vulnerable, forever confusing the goddess in his mind with the mortal before his eyes. Carl Jung warned that the anima is never simply a gentle muse or a benevolent inner guide. Like every archetype, she has two faces, one radiant, one shadowed. When she appears in her darker form, she is not a source of inspiration but a force of entrapment. This is the realm of the devouring feminine, the archetype that seduces with beauty, promises of completion, and whispers of love, yet leaves the man hollowed, weakened, and consumed. Myths across cultures have always carried this warning. The sirens in Homer's Odyssey lured sailors with voices so enchanting that men steered their ships into the rocks. The femme fatale in countless stories entrances men, only to lead them into ruin. Jung recognized that these tales were not just moral fables, they were symbolic descriptions of what happens when the anima manifests in her shadow form. The dark anima thrives on projection, but she twists it into something poisonous. Instead of reflecting a man's higher potential, she mirrors back his repressed vulnerabilities, his secret fears, his unresolved wounds. She becomes a magnet for everything within him that he refuses to confront. This is why some men find themselves obsessively drawn to relationships that they know are destructive. They cannot resist the pull, because it is not merely about the woman, it is about their own unconscious being projected onto her. In this way, the woman becomes both irresistible and terrifying. She seems to hold power over his very soul, but what she truly holds is the mirror to his shadow. Consider the man who becomes entangled with a woman who manipulates, deceives, or drains him emotionally. He sees the warning signs but ignores them, convinced that he cannot live without her. He sacrifices his career, his friendships, even his self-respect, all in the desperate hope of maintaining the connection. Outsiders might call him foolish, but from a Jungian perspective, he is under the spell of the dark anima. She has awakened his unconscious wounds and bound him through them. He believes she is the cause of his suffering, yet the truth is more disturbing. She has only activated what was already lying dormant within him. Jung described this phenomenon as a man being swallowed by his own unconscious. The dark anima becomes a portal to chaos. She destabilizes him, pulling him into mood swings, irrational decisions, and emotional storms. What he once called love begins to feel like madness. He obsesses over her every word, interprets her smallest actions as signs of salvation or doom. He cannot focus on his own life, because his energy is consumed by the gravitational pull of the shadow feminine. This is why Jung compared the dark anima to a devouring mother. She does not nurture, she consumes. Nietzsche's words capture the experience. When you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. The abyss, in this sense, is not the woman herself, but the unconscious force she embodies. The more a man fixates on her, the more he is staring into his own hidden darkness. If he is not careful, he begins to merge with it. His identity dissolves, his values collapse, and he finds himself doing things he never thought possible, lying, begging, betraying his own integrity, all in service of the obsession. Modern culture provides endless examples of this pattern. Men lose themselves in toxic relationships, unable to break free even when their health, wealth, and dignity deteriorate. Others experience it not with a living partner, but with fantasy. Pornography, celebrity worship, and virtual influencers all serve as vessels for the dark anima. They promise satisfaction but leave men emptier with every indulgence. The shadow anima does not give, she takes. And she takes until nothing remains but dependency and despair. The danger is amplified by how seductive she appears. In her dark form, the Anima wears the mask of ultimate fulfillment. She convinces the man that she alone holds the key to his happiness, that without her he is incomplete. He clings to her as if she were oxygen, unable to see that the very act of clinging is what suffocates him. Jung emphasized that this illusion is nearly impossible to resist without conscious awareness. The man believes he is fighting for love, when in truth he is wrestling with his own shadow, projected outward. The dark Anima also has a cunning way of destabilizing a man's sense of reality. He may begin to doubt his own perceptions, to question whether he is sane. One day he feels euphoric, convinced he has found paradise. The next he is plunged into despair, convinced he has lost everything. This cycle of idealization and devaluation is the classic hallmark of the destructive Anima. It mirrors the psychological pattern of addiction, a brief high, followed by a devastating crash, then the desperate craving to return to the high at any cost. In this way, the dark Anima becomes a spiritual parasite. She feeds on the man's psychic energy, draining him of clarity, willpower, and direction. He becomes a ghost of himself, living not for his own growth but for the endless pursuit of an unattainable ideal. Some men never escape this grip. They spend years, even lifetimes, entangled in destructive patterns that began with the projection of their shadow Anima. Others break free only after catastrophic collapse, when everything they valued has been destroyed and they have no choice but to confront the truth. Jung did not present these ideas as abstract speculation. He saw them play out in his patients' lives and in his own inner visions. The Anima in her dark form is not merely a difficult partner or a bad relationship. She is a psychic reality, a force as old as myth, one that can bring men face to face with the most dangerous aspects of their own unconscious. This is why he urged men to recognize the power of projection. To ignore it is to fall prey to it. To see it is to take the first step toward reclaiming one's soul from the grasp of the devouring feminine. Why do men fall again and again into the same trap, even when the warning signs are clear and the consequences are devastating? Jung's answer lies in the structure of the male psyche itself. The Anima does not only lure from the outside, she resonates with an emptiness inside, a longing for wholeness that men often do not understand. This blind spot is not simply weakness or foolishness, it is a deeply rooted psychological pattern shaped by childhood, by cultural ideals, and by primal desires that stretch back to humanity's origins. Freud described it through the Oedipus complex, the unresolved bond with the mother, a tension between dependence and autonomy. A boy first experiences love, comfort, and nourishment through a maternal figure. This creates an emotional blueprint. As he grows, he seeks echoes of that original bond, often unconsciously searching for a woman who will recreate the sense of safety, validation, or unconditional love. But what begins as longing can turn into captivity. If unresolved, the man projects this infantile need onto adult relationships, expecting women to fulfill what was never truly healed. The woman becomes not just a partner but a symbolic mother, and he becomes ensnared in a cycle of neediness and dependency. The Stoics saw the same vulnerability but described it differently. For them, the male weakness was desire itself, an uncontrolled hunger that blinds reason. Epictetus warned that the moment a man loses sovereignty over his own passions, he becomes a slave. The object of his desire rules him more effectively than any tyrant could. Modern men might think they are free, but many live as prisoners to desire. Whether through obsessive relationships, compulsive consumption of sexual imagery, or the endless chase of validation from women, the result is the same: their freedom is compromised, their judgment clouded. The blindness deepens because the projection feels so real. When the Anima awakens, the man is convinced that what he sees is truth. He does not realize he is gazing at a mirror of his own unconscious. The woman seems to hold power over him, but in reality, she is amplifying what he carries inside. The longing, the obsession, the idealization, they are all reflections of his own psyche. Without awareness, he cannot separate the image from the person. He does not love her, he loves the piece of himself he has lost and now sees in her. This is why attempts to rationalize or snap out of it often fail. He is not just breaking an attachment to a woman, he is severing an attachment to a part of his own soul projected outward. Modern culture has created new arenas where this blind spot thrives. In simp culture, countless men pour time, money, and emotional energy into women who barely acknowledge them. They convince themselves that if they give enough, prove enough, or worship enough, they will win her affection. But behind this lies the same unconscious mechanism Jung described. The man is not engaging with the woman as she is, he is interacting with his projection of the anima, convinced she is the embodiment of what he lacks. The pain comes when reality refuses to meet the fantasy. Pornography amplifies the blind spot even further. It offers endless variations of the anima in its most seductive forms, ready to be consumed at will. The danger is not only addiction, but the distortion of perception. A man begins to expect real women to embody these archetypal images, forgetting that no human can compete with the exaggerated creations of his unconscious fantasies magnified through media. This deepens his sense of dissatisfaction and alienation, driving him further into illusion. Even in ordinary relationships, the blind spot manifests as patterns. A man repeatedly chooses partners who exploit him, yet he insists each time that this one is different. Another man sabotages relationships by demanding perfection, unable to accept that real intimacy involves flaws and compromise. Both are trapped by projections. The first cannot see that his attraction to manipulation is rooted in unresolved wounds. The second cannot see that his demand for a flawless goddess is an impossible expectation born of the anima's idealized image. Jung explained that men are not destroyed by women themselves but by their illusions of them. This is a radical statement because it shifts responsibility inward. It is easy to blame the toxic partner or manipulative woman, but the deeper truth is that the unconscious projection makes such dynamics possible in the first place. The man's blind spot is his failure to recognize the role of his psyche in creating the situation. Until he faces that, he remains vulnerable to repetition. Nietzsche hinted at this weakness when he spoke of man's tendency to seek escape in illusions rather than confront reality. He argued that people prefer comforting lies to harsh truths, and in matters of love, this is especially potent. The comforting lie is that the woman will complete him, save him, or redeem him. The harsh truth is that no one can do this work for him, the gap he feels must be confronted within. But to accept this is terrifying, because it means facing the emptiness without the anesthetic of fantasy. This blind spot also explains why warnings rarely work. Friends may tell a man he is being used, that he is losing himself, but he cannot hear them. Logic is powerless against the grip of the unconscious. To him, their warnings sound cynical or jealous. Only when the illusion collapses painfully, through betrayal, loss, or despair, does he begin to glimpse the truth. Yet even then, many rush to repeat the cycle, seeking another projection to fill the void rather than confronting the root cause. The male blind spot is therefore not merely a personal weakness but a universal vulnerability. It is the meeting point between biology, culture, and the unconscious. It is the drive to find completion outside of oneself, to hand over power to an image that feels divine. Some men escape it temporarily, others succumb repeatedly, but it remains a force that shapes lives, ruins ambitions, and shatters identities. Until it is made conscious, the man remains at the mercy of forces he cannot see but that direct him with unrelenting power. Recognition is the beginning of freedom, yet recognition is also the most difficult step. A man caught in the spell of the anima often believes he is seeing clearly when, in fact, he is drowning in illusion. Jung insisted that awareness is the only weapon against unconscious forces, and to awaken it one must learn to notice both the external red flags in relationships and the internal warning signs within oneself. These signals are subtle at first, but once understood, they reveal whether the feminine presence in one's life is becoming a destructive projection rather than a real encounter with a human being. One of the most obvious red flags is excessive idealization. When a man speaks of a woman as flawless, perfect, or otherworldly, he is no longer describing a person, he is describing his anima. Real people are complex, imperfect, and contradictory. The moment a woman seems to embody divinity itself, the man should pause and ask, is she truly this extraordinary, or have I draped her in the golden veil of my own unconscious? Idealization blinds him to reality and sets the stage for inevitable disappointment. When she inevitably shows ordinary human flaws, he feels betrayed, not realizing he betrayed himself by refusing to see her clearly from the start. Another external sign is emotional manipulation. A relationship where the man constantly feels like he is walking on eggshells, where his sense of self shrinks under the weight of another's moods, is a sign that the shadow anima has entered the stage. The woman may be consciously manipulative, or she may simply trigger in him the unresolved aspects of his psyche, but the effect is the same. He becomes reactive, dependent, and unable to stand firmly on his own ground. He finds himself explaining away mistreatment, convincing himself that her volatility is proof of her depth or passion. In reality, he is mistaking chaos for intensity, surrendering his stability in exchange for the illusion of love. Loss of self-agency is perhaps the clearest marker. A man who once had ambition, focus, and values finds them slipping away as he orbits entirely around her. His goals no longer matter, his friendships fade, his own sense of purpose becomes secondary to keeping her attention. This erosion of agency is exactly what Jung warned about. The anima, when projected unconsciously, consumes the man's psychic energy. She demands worship, and in giving it, he abandons himself. He is no longer living his own life but performing a role in service of an archetype he does not recognize. Jung never suggested that the answer was hatred or avoidance of women. That would be another illusion, another projection of the shadow. Instead, he emphasized seeing clearly. The man must train his inner vision to separate the woman herself from the archetype she has awakened in him. This requires brutal honesty. He must ask, am I responding to who she is, or to who I imagine her to be? Am I relating to her as a person, or am I enthralled by the goddess, the muse, or the destroyer my psyche has placed upon her? Such questions pierce through the veil and begin to break the spell. Real-life examples make this painfully clear. Consider the man who repeatedly finds himself in toxic relationships, always with the same type of partner. He may complain that all women are manipulative or I just have bad luck, but the deeper truth is that he is unconsciously seeking the projection of his anima over and over. Each time, he believes he has found something new, but he is repeating a pattern carved into his psyche long ago. Until he confronts this pattern, the cycle will continue, no matter how many relationships he enters. The women change, but the unconscious script remains the same. The Stoics offered a remedy centuries before Jung articulated it: cultivate detachment. For Marcus Aurelius, freedom came not from avoiding temptation but from seeing things as they truly are. If a man can step back and strip away the fantasy, he can look at a situation soberly. Is this relationship nourishing my growth, or draining it? Is my affection grounded in reality, or inflated by imagination? Such questions cut through the fog of projection. Detachment does not mean coldness, it means refusing to let desire blur perception. Another critical step in recognition is learning to observe the internal red flags. These are not always obvious but reveal themselves through certain psychological states. Obsession is one. When a man cannot stop thinking about her, when his mind circles endlessly, analyzing her words, her silences, her gestures, he is no longer dealing with reality, he is trapped in the whirlpool of projection. Another internal signal is emotional volatility. If her presence sends him swinging between ecstasy and despair, it is a sign the anima has seized control. Real intimacy creates stability, not wild oscillation. Fear of loss also exposes the projection. A man deeply afraid of being abandoned is often less afraid of losing her than of losing the part of himself she represents. He clings desperately because he believes she carries his wholeness. Jung would say he is clinging not to her but to his own soul, which he has mistakenly placed in her hands. Recognizing this fear for what it is begins to dissolve its grip. The work of recognition is uncomfortable, because it forces a man to admit that much of what he believed about her was a story he told himself. It requires humility to accept that the intensity he felt was not proof of destiny but proof of his own unconscious dynamics. Yet this humility is also liberating. The moment he sees that the destructive patterns are born from projection, he can begin to reclaim his power. He no longer needs to curse fate or demonize women, he can take responsibility for the illusions his psyche generates. Recognition also demands that he look inward at the parts of himself he has neglected. The anima grows powerful in proportion to the man's disconnection from his own inner world. When he ignores his emotions, represses his creativity, or denies his vulnerability, the anima compensates by appearing externally in exaggerated form. She forces him to confront what he has buried. To recognize her, then, is also to recognize himself. It is to admit that the chaos outside is a reflection of the chaos within, that the goddess or the demon he sees in her is a mirror of his own unacknowledged depths. Breaking free from destructive cycles requires more than awareness. It demands an act of inner rebellion, a refusal to remain enslaved to unconscious forces that have dictated one's choices for years, perhaps decades. Jung emphasized that projection does not vanish simply because one understands it intellectually. It must be withdrawn, piece by piece, through deliberate inner work. This process is slow, often painful, but it is also the only path toward true autonomy. To break free, a man must not only recognize the destructive anima at play, but also reclaim the psychic energy he has poured into her image and redirected back into his own life. The first step in liberation is confrontation. A man must look directly at the patterns he has lived out, even if it fills him with shame or regret. This confrontation is not a single moment but an ongoing dialogue with the self. He must trace the cycle, the allure of the mysterious woman, the intoxication of idealization, the gradual erosion of selfhood, the crisis of abandonment or betrayal, and the return to despair. By mapping this pattern clearly, he begins to see that what felt like unique experiences were repetitions of an inner script. Awareness of this script allows him to interrupt it, to resist the seduction before it fully takes hold. Detachment, as the Stoics taught, is a weapon in this struggle. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes free when it sees things as they truly are. For the man entrapped by anima possession, detachment means stepping back from the intoxication of emotions and asking hard questions. What is truly happening here? Is this woman nourishing me, or am I projecting onto her my hunger for completion? By creating this gap between impulse and action, he loosens the anima's grip. He no longer obeys the flood of emotions blindly but subjects them to examination. This shift marks the beginning of reclaiming inner authority. Another essential act is shadow work. The destructive anima often thrives on disowned aspects of the self, repressed emotions, unresolved childhood wounds, and neglected desires. When these remain hidden, the psyche seeks them externally, attaching them to another person. To break free, a man must turn inward and face what he has avoided. This may involve revisiting painful memories, acknowledging vulnerabilities he denied, or exploring parts of his personality he once rejected. Each piece of shadow reclaimed reduces the power of projection. The woman no longer needs to embody his mother, his muse, or his destroyer, because he has learned to recognize those figures within himself. Creative expression is another way of dissolving destructive cycles. Jung saw imagination and art as bridges between conscious and unconscious, allowing inner forces to take shape without overwhelming the ego. A man who channels his emotions into painting, writing, or music is no longer at the mercy of the anima. He gives her form and voice within himself rather than projecting her onto another. The destructive cycle begins to weaken because the psychic energy that once fueled obsession now fuels creation. What was once a source of torment becomes a source of vitality. Boundaries play a critical role in this liberation. A man trapped by anima possession often loses the ability to set limits, sacrificing his needs to maintain her approval. Breaking free requires learning to say no, to assert the self without fear of rejection. Boundaries are not walls of coldness but acts of self-respect. They remind the man that his life is his own, not a stage for the unconscious drama of another. Each time he asserts a boundary, he reclaims a fragment of the self that had been surrendered. Another dimension is the cultivation of solitude. Many men fear being alone, because without the projection of the anima, they feel empty. Yet it is precisely in solitude that integration occurs. By withdrawing from constant external stimulation, a man confronts the silence within, and discovers that the soul he sought in women has always been inside him. Solitude teaches him that he is not incomplete, that wholeness is not given by another but uncovered within. This realization dissolves the desperate need for possession, replacing it with quiet strength. There is also a spiritual aspect to breaking free. Jung described individuation as a sacred process, where the ego unites with the deeper self. For the man enslaved to projection, liberation often feels like a death and rebirth. The old self, the one who chased illusions, must die, so a more grounded self can emerge. This transformation is rarely gentle, it feels like losing everything. Yet what dies is not the true self but the false attachments that kept him bound. Spiritual practices such as meditation, prayer, or contemplation can serve as anchors, reminding him that his worth is not determined by another's gaze but by his alignment with the deeper currents of his being. Breaking free also requires vigilance. The anima does not vanish, she changes form. Just when a man believes he has transcended her, she may reappear in a new relationship, a new obsession, or even in dreams. Liberation is therefore not a final victory but an ongoing discipline. It means learning to live with the presence of the anima consciously, to see her as guide and companion rather than captor. Each time her shadow emerges, he must meet it with awareness, refusing to be swallowed again by illusion. The process demands courage because it is easier to remain in the cycle. The intoxication of projection, though destructive, is also exhilarating. To give it up feels like giving up passion itself. Many men cling to toxic patterns because they fear life without them will be dull and colorless. Yet the courage to step away reveals a deeper vitality, not the unstable fire of obsession, but the steady flame of a self no longer divided. This courage is not built overnight, it grows each time the man chooses awareness over blindness, authenticity over illusion, truth over comfort. Through these struggles, he begins to sense freedom as something tangible. The chains that once bound him loosen, not because the anima has disappeared, but because he has stopped mistaking her for the whole of reality. The destructive cycles that once repeated endlessly begin to break apart, replaced by new possibilities of living. Each step of reclamation, through confrontation, detachment, shadow work, creativity, boundaries, solitude, and vigilance, transforms the relationship between the man and his inner feminine. What was once possession becomes partnership, and what was once destruction becomes a path toward wholeness. Carl Jung did not teach men to fear women, he taught men to fear their own blindness. Some women carry the dark anima force, but it is men's lack of awareness that gives it power. When you learn to see beyond the mask, you stop being a victim, and start walking the path of individuation, where the feminine is no longer your destroyer, but your greatest teacher.